Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 738. I had the white pieces and played c4, and he went e5. You see that's the second choice here, but a very respectable way to play, the reverse Sicilian. I went g3, and now I went f5. That's a bit of a rare move. Normally when the knights come out, or one of these other pawn moves, d6 or c6. Very logical moves, all of them. But f5 is interesting and not a bad way to play, really. The chess engine rates all of these positions as about equal through the opening part of the game. Let's see, I could try bishop to g2 here, or even d4, going for kind of the tall gambit approach to the Grand Prix attack, but with colors reversed. But e3 turns out to be a good move. In fact, it was the engine's top choice, at least at a quick look. So, in such a position where there's not much experience, a small sample in the database, it doesn't mean that a move is necessarily bad if it's not there. Let's see, he went knight f6, bishop g2, so we get some normal developing moves, and as I say, everything is in the range of about equal here. I'm developing my knight here to keep it out of the way of the bishop, and also to keep some extra force on that f4 square, and also if he ever pushes e4, then I will put my knight on f4, so that'll be handy. Let's see, he castled here. I played d4, kind of asking whether he wants to push that pawn forward or defend it. He chose to defend it, and I think that's the right choice. It's probably better for black to try and hold on to those squares rather than giving up the f4 square, even though it does look at first like he might be shutting in my light-squared bishop, but I think that can be freed fairly easily. Okay, so it was, I went knight b to c3 here. He went c6, keeping my knight out of these squares. I castled. And then this move, knight b d7, this was the first move the chess engine really questioned. I have to say it seems like a pretty natural move, but just to show you, the chess engine would prefer to develop the knight out here to a6. And then if I play in the game, if I play like I did in the game with b3, he could come to c7 with his knight. And it's looking at this good square on e6. A knight from there would control or influence a lot of interesting squares. So looks like a good idea to me and something to keep in mind. If you have a similar kind of position, you don't have to automatically go to d7. You can go a6, c7. Anyway, back to the game. My opponent went knight b d7. I think there's nothing really wrong with this. I don't know what the chess engine sees that's so awful. See, I go b3. He went rook b8, preparing to push his b pawn forward. I went bishop a3, which is kind of walking into this pawn push, but I was kind of tempted to put a little pressure on this pawn and maybe threaten to take on e5, as happened in the game. So I went for that anyway. When he went with b5, of course, I have to worry about this pawn push here to b6, forking my bishop and knight. But, I can throw in this exchange first. I can take on e5 because it hits his knight. He can't afford the pawn push. I'll take his knight. If he takes one of my pieces, I'll take his bishop. So I get two pieces for one. So he has to take back. But the way he took back was actually a mistake. So I think this is the first real mistake of the game. He should have just taken with the pawn and kept control of these squares. When he takes with the knight, he's giving up the f4 square for my use, and it turns out to be pretty strong. Let's see. So just to look at this a little bit, the thing he didn't like about this, and maybe it's a little bit surprising that this is so good for black, is it's actually a pawn sack. He's giving up that pawn on c6. But let's see. Oh yeah, first I have to take here, right? I have to take his bishop off first because my bishop is hanging, and then I can take on c6. And then, but then he can take my pawn. If I take back, I'm left with this isolated pawn. I do have an extra pawn. My pieces are a little bit loose. He's got a fine-looking rook on the open file there, at least for the moment. Yeah, the chess engine rates this as equal. Maybe it even sees a line where he can get the pawn back in some way or other. Anyway, just thought that was interesting. And let's see, there was one more trick here. After he takes the pawn, I could have tried this check, trying to round up the pawn with my bishop. But even here, after knight to b6, the chess engine prefers black. I guess my bishop is going to have trouble finding squares to go to. And it's just interesting. Yeah, I don't quite see it. I mean, to me, it looks like white is a pawn up, and I would certainly have gone for something like this, but the chess engine actually prefers black in this position. Anyway, so he took with the knight. So it's a move that makes sense. It defends the c-pawn, so it's not hanging, but it does give up the square, and so he's keeping his material, but in terms of the position, it starts to go downhill at this point. Let's see, I take on b5, and he takes back. I still have to worry about this threat of the pawn push, so I drop my bishop down to b2, and we can see that one defect, in addition to this weak f4 square that he's given me, is also the d6 pawn is backwards. Well, it's not backwards, it's isolated, and I can bring pressure to bear on it, and it keeps his bishop locked up behind the pawn chain. So yeah, my pieces are more active and my pawn structure is better, so it's a significant edge, actually. Let's see, he went a6, deciding to defend this pawn and hold on to it rather than pushing it forward and harassing my knight. My knight probably would have just gone to d5 anyway. And, well, this keeps control of some squares, so I can't put my knight there. And it also frees up his rook, so it's not needed to defend that pawn constantly. So I went knight f4 now, taking advantage of that square. And he went g5. I actually thought about this before playing knight f4, because it's a common idea to play the move h4 here first to prepare knight f4 if that g5 move is going to be a nuisance. But in this case, I didn't see that g5 would be a problem. In fact, I think it's more weakening than anything else. My knight has a good square on d5, and now his king position is much more open. And let's see, he went bishop b7 here. It seems to be losing after that. So the move that needs to be played here is g4. Having played g5, the chess engine wants to continue all the way with g4. The idea is to prevent me from playing the f4 move that I get in the game, because he can take on passant. So that would be the way to play it. Let's see, he went bishop b7 instead. Pretty natural, just putting pressure on this guy. And let's see, I went rook b1. I gave those moves question marks because according to the chess engine, bishop b7 is losing and rook b1 is giving back a lot of the advantage. But I think rook b1 is okay. But the immediate f4 seems to be the strongest move here. I play f4, and well, after an exchange, that knight has to move. And then my queen comes up here, and it's just with my active pieces and his disrupted king side here and his awkward pawn structure, the chess engine thinks this is just a winning position for white. Kind of interesting. Anyway, I played rook b1 because of a particular line I saw, and we get something like this. Let's see, he first dropped his bishop back to a8, getting out of the way of the rook. I went ahead and exchanged on f6, and I was starting to see the idea now. You know, I want to open up this diagonal, and I didn't want my bishop to be loose because there might be a backfire along the diagonal. He took here, and I play knight d5, hitting his bishop. And, you know, the backfire I was worried about was something like knight f6 check, where I could win the knight, but if my bishop was loose, he could win my bishop. So now that's not a problem. Knight f6 check, I can just take the knight. The bishop is defended. So I went king g7. That may not be the best defense, but I think everything loses at this point. I take on f6, and then whatever piece ends up on this f6 square, it's going to be subject to this pin from the, it's going to be a target, or what's that? Well, the knight is the subject of the pin, and that's just the piece it's pinned against. Some valuable piece will end up on f6, and so I can affect that pin on the knight. And now I make a mistake here. I don't pursue this in the most effective way. I really should just take with the e-pawn, which is what I would want to do. This keeps this solid pawn structure in front of my king. But I was worried about this check. But it turns out I was not thinking clearly, because this bishop d4 move blocks the check, and the queen has to move off that diagonal. So this the knight will fall on the next move after the queen steps away. So that would be fine. So that would be the best way to play. When I play g takes f4, I don't have to worry about checks along this diagonal, but it opened up the g file, and there's some problems here. It's still a winning position for white, but there's a lot of counterplay. And if he had played rook g6 first, this is the line that gives the most trouble. Let's see, the bishop is under attack from his bishop and his rook, so I have to defend it. Then he can bring his queen in to h4, looking at my rook. Let's see, I can take the knight finally, and then he can bring his rook over, getting 3 pieces piled up. Let's see, and then there's some long maneuvering sequence I went through here. It's kind of complicated, but it was tricky for white to survive this position, even though with best play, white comes out ahead. So I was lucky he didn't play that in the best way. Let's see, I took on f4, and he just traded bishops first, and then gave the check. And now everything is fine again. I just keep an edge the whole rest of the game. And he played on, for quite a while. But after, well, let's go through a few moves here. I went, after king h1, he went queen to e7. His knight is still pinned, so he can't move it away. I finally get to grab the knight. And he went queen b7 check. That was the point of his maneuver, but I can block with my queen. And he went king to g8, so the queen might come over here and double, I guess. But I traded queens. And yeah, I think I'm just going to step through the rest of this. This is a pretty straightforward win from this point. Although it does take a long time and you have to be careful, but basically it's a winning endgame. So you just trade down and keep your pawns. You don't want to give up any pawns. But with an extra pawn and an extra piece, there's really no problem in winning. But he kept posing problems, which is what you should do when you're losing. You should try and create as many difficulties as possible. But I looked at it with a chess engine, and I was always winning. So neither of us made any big blunders, but he just had a losing position from the beginning, and I just had to gradually march my pawns up and be a little bit careful that I kept everything defended. And finally, let's see, yeah, I actually had the queen. Yeah, it was a little bit tricky figuring out how to get those pawns forward and queening. But, well, you can watch the game. I sacrificed the bishop, and now he sacrifices his rook for the queen or trades his rook for the queen I just created. And now I'm just a rook up, and I just block his king off from where it can do anything. And he finally resigned at this point. So at this point, yeah, I was just going to keep the rook there, bring my king up, and mate with rook and king. Anyway, it was an interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon. Bye.